Today, we're talking about anger. And here's what I know about you. This isn't a religious thing. This is just a human thing. Nobody, and you're a nobody, not really, like you're part of a nobody in this equation. Everybody, somebody, everybody. Nobody wants anger to be the boss of them, right? I mean, you don't want anger to be your boss. You've never thought of it in those terms. We'll talk about it in just a minute. Nobody wants anger to be the boss of them. And nobody who loves you wants anger to be the boss of you, and you don't want anger to be the boss of anybody that you love or you have to work with. We've seen what happens when that happens. We've been on the other side of anger or frustration or rage. And when we talk about anger, we're not just talking about extroverted anger, people who lose their temper. You may never raise your voice. You may be more like me. You don't lose your temper, but you're still scary because your moodiness, your silence is deafening. Your silence is intimidating. Your silence is controlling. And you pride yourself because you don't ever extrovert your anger, but you introvert your anger, and it has the same effect on the people closest to you. So whether you shove it down or whether you shut people down, anger is a bad boss. Unless, there is an exception to this, unless it's what I call, and maybe there's a better phrase for this, what I call crusader anger. This is a good anger. Crusader anger is when somebody gets angry at an injustice in the world or evil in the world or a disease in the world, and they finally get so frustrated and so angry, they step out and they say, you know what? Somebody needs to do something about this. So they go to work, and as a result of crusader anger, some incredible things have happened in the world. Child labor laws, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, we could go on and on and on. All over the world throughout history, there have been men and women who finally got so fed up with something that needed to change. They had kind of this crusader anger, and it drove them to bring about change. But, and this is where we pivot back to most of us, crusader anger reflects concern over what other people aren't getting that they deserve. The frustration and the anger that drives us crazy and messes up our relationships and causes us to look in the mirror at times and think, why did I say that? Why do I think that? Why do I behave that way? Is the anger that comes from what happens when I'm not getting what I'm sure I deserve. When you're not getting what you're sure you deserve. So there's a parallel, there's a similarity. One is constructive. One, as you already know, is extraordinarily destructive. Here's what James says. He asks two questions. The first one is this. He says, he's just writing, this is a letter, so he's writing this. So there's somebody's reading this in churches in Judea and maybe that area of the world. Who is wise and understanding among you? And he's not asking anybody to raise their hand, and I'll explain why in a minute. Who is wise and understanding? Wisdom means who has insight. Wise people understand that life is connected. Wise people understand the past impacts the future and the present impacts the future. That what's going on now is going to show up later, that life is connected. So James says, okay, do you think you're wise? Do you think you're insightful? Do you know how to keep things in perspective? He says, if so, I want to challenge you. Let me see your wisdom and let me see your understanding by the deeds you do and the humility that comes from wisdom. Because wise people, this is so important, wise people are always humble because arrogance doesn't make any sense. Arrogance is irrational. Arrogance flies in the face of everything we know about how the world works and how people are. He says, so if you're wise, I want to see your wisdom in how you live your life, and it's going to be exported through your humility, because wisdom always leads to humility. Every once in a while, and you've had this experience, I'll run into somebody or meet somebody or hear somebody on the news, and they just are so arrogant. I mean, they're just like, oh. And whenever I run into see arrogant men or women, and sometimes it's just a big personality, but you know what, sometimes it goes beyond just a big personality, and I want to ask them, and I would never do this because this would be arrogant, and I don't want to be arrogant, but I want to walk up to them and say, excuse me, do you think you're never going to die? Do you think that somehow you're an exception to all the rules because the way you're talking, the way you're living, what you're expecting of others, it seems like you seem like somehow you're an exception to all the rules. You do realize you're going to die. You do realize that you have control over virtually nothing that had anything to do with making you who you are and has anything to do with controlling your future. I mean, you do realize that you are, a victim, or you are having to live your life in sync with things that you have no control over like everybody else. In other words, You're louder than everybody else, but you're not that special. I mean, this is because wisdom understands. I mean, you've met people like this, and maybe you are people like that, and you're like, I already don't like you. Okay, so just, be patient. Wisdom understands. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is understanding how the world works, how things are. That's why the wiser you are, the more humble you're going to be. Because humility makes more sense, but humility is so powerful, but humility is not natural. Natural, well, James tells us, he says, here's the opposite of all that. But if you harbor, that is, you allow it to dock. If you allow envy to dock, if you allow selfish ambition to dock, to harbor in your hearts, if you allow things that really fly in the face of reality and fly in the face of the way that the world really works, envy is, it's not fair. Well, life's not fair. I mean, fairness ended in the Garden of Eden. I mean, nothing's been fair since, right? I mean, how many of you can dunk a basketball, Right, exactly. So it's not fair, okay? But we tell our kids that all the time. But he said, if you allow things to get lodged in your heart, that's the point of this series. If you get things lodged in your heart that are really out of sync with reality, the way the world works, then it's just going to go bad for you. And what's in you is going to come out of you. If you let all that stuff live down in there unaddressed, it's going to be a problem. And he says, look, and don't boast. His wording is a little funky here. And don't boast about it or deny the truth. So, if you harbor bitter envy, you kind of keep it on the inside, and selfish ambition, it's all about you, because people who lack wisdom lack humility, and they make the world all about themselves. Making the world all about you is not wise. Making the world all about you doesn't even make any sense. He says, but if you're stuck there, if you allow that stuff to harbor in your heart and it becomes the filter through which you live, through which you talk, through which you parent, through which you do marriage, he said, you're just denying the truth. And wise people don't deny the truth. Wise people live in light of the truth. And so James is saying to his audience, look, don't get stuck and don't get satisfied and don't pretend to be fine. God has called you to something better. And then he tells us kind of what we already know. He says, because wherever you find this stuff lodged in a heart, wherever you find somebody deceived into thinking they're more than they really are and they lack wisdom and humility, for where you find this, he says, where you find this envy and selfish ambition, there you find, here it is, there you find disorder and every evil practice. And again, this is kind of his, fanciful way, not fanciful, but his sort of complicated, wordy way of saying what Jesus said. That when things get lodged inside of us, they're eventually coming out of us. And where you have arrogance and a lack of understanding of how the world works and the way things really are and how dependent you are on the people around you and circumstances you had no control over, when you lose sight of that and arrogance gets lodged in your heart, eventually there's going to be disorder and every evil practice. Because people who allow these things to get lodged in their heart are able to justify just about anything. What's on the inside of you is coming for you. What's on the inside of you is coming for the people around you. So at this point, James is writing all this down, and it's like he pauses and thinks, okay, I got to get to the point. So he sort of laid the groundwork for where he's going. How many among you are wise and, have understanding? How many of you understand the power of humility? How many of you understand that you can't get stuff? He's kind of laid the groundwork, and now he goes for his point. And now he tells us how to keep anger from lodging in our heart and how to keep anger from becoming the boss of us. But he launches into this part of the discussion with another question. And here's the question. He says, so having said all that, think about this. What causes fights? I've said if you have wisdom, you'll have humility, and humility leads to more wisdom and understanding about how the world works. And if you allow bitter envy and selfish ambition to lodge in your heart, then there's going to be disorder and fights. And if you don't believe me, then think about this. Where does that hostility, where do fights come from? What causes fights? What causes conflict? What causes fights, he goes on, and quarrels among you? Now, this is a really interesting question. What causes it? He's asking the question, what's the root cause? Now, when some of you see this question, when some of us see this question, we say, well, James, you're asking the question incorrectly. It's not what, it's who. It's who causes fights and who causes quarrels. And I know the answer to that. It's my mom. She will not mind her own business. I am an adult. I have my own family. And my mom just got to tell me how to parent, what to do, when to get up, and it doesn't look right. And every time she walks in my house, I feel judged. And I'm like, ugh, I know what causes quarrels. It's not a what, it's a who. It's my dad. It's my brother-in-law. Every time he comes over, he got to talk about my yard and how to do my yard. And I'm like, I don't even care. It's not your yard. It's not a what, it's a who. It's my ninth grade son. He knows everything. He knows everything. And the problem is, he might really know everything. And everything I do is wrong. And he wins all the arguments. And I feel like, well, how did my ninth grade son get in control of our family? It's my boss. It's the manager at work that, she just, I don't know. There's something about her just grates on me. The problem is not a what. The problem is a who. And James is like, that's why we're talking about this. Because you're wrong. It's a what. It's not a who. And as long as you think it's a who, you will never get to the root of the real what. So he says, where do fights and quarrels, where does it come from? What's the source? And I want to look out there in the world and say, I'm just frustrated because I'm responding to something out there. He says, come on. Who is wise and understanding among you? Don't they really come from your desires that battle inside of you? To which we say, no, they don't. Have you met? You need to meet my boss. Then you would understand the source of my quarrels. You need to meet my wife. I don't know. There's just something going on. You need to meet my husband. He used to be such a gentleman. And James is going, no, come on. Who is wise? Who is humble? Who is understanding among you? Let's face an important fact that could possibly change everything for you. The source of the fighting and the struggles and the quarrels among you. The source is something going on inside of you. They don't come from his or her inability to see the world the way that you see it, even though that's the way we often see it. I think that, the reason we struggle is because you won't see things my way. And if I could just get you to see things my way, which of course is the right way, if I could just get you to see things my way, then when we wouldn't fight and quarrel, and James says, no, you don't understand the root. And as long as you think the source is out there, you're never going to deal with it, and you're actually going to feed something ugly and dangerous in here. Now, let me pause and say this. This principle, this thing he's teaching us, I'm telling you, it is life-changing. That's not hyperbole. It is relationship changing. It is relationship healing. In any relationship, if both parties can embrace what James is teaching us and telling us, it changes everything. So let me read the verse again. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? And the answer is, yes, they do every single time. Because the reason we fight and the reason we quarrel and the reason we're angry is because there's something we want that we aren't getting. There's something we want that we aren't getting. There's something I want. I want respect from him, and I'm not getting respect. I just want you to clean up your room because that shows you that you respect me, and I'm not getting what I want. I just want you to come home on time because we talked about this 10 times, and you promised, and you won't come home on time. I just want you to give me a fair shot. I just want credit for my ideas. I'm upset, and I'm frustrated, and anybody that hears my story says, you're right, but the root of it is not out there. The root of it is in here because I'm not getting what I want. To which I know how you respond. You respond the same way I do. But wait a minute. But I earned it. Right. You earned it. And you want to get what you earned, right? Yeah, and you're not getting what you earned, right? So you're not getting what you want. Oh, well, yeah. But they promised. I mean, come on. They promised, and they didn't keep their promise. Right. So you want them to keep their promise. Yeah. So you're not getting what you want. Yeah. Okay, but it wasn't even just. I mean, what they did, anybody who heard my story, what they did wasn't fair. I know. And you want what's fair, don't you? Yes, I want what's fair. You're not getting what's fair, are you? No, you're not getting what you want. And I'm just telling you, if you can pause in the moment when the frustration or anger or rage or whatever word you want to use starts rising, and you can pause in the moment and recognize, you know what the problem is? Part of the problem is, me. Now, see, parents, this should be so intuitive for us, right? If you're a parent and you have 2 little kids, or at any point had 2 little kids, because you're driving, remember, you got one hand on the wheel and one hand on the back seat, or 2 rows, and you're going, stop it, be quiet, and your kids are back here negotiating, going, he, she, and you're going, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't need to be the judge. I'm just the jury. You're both guilty, so be quiet and quit touching her and get on the, why? Because as the parent, you know, the problem isn't really the presenting problem. The problem is there's 2 kids in the back seat, and they both want something, and neither one of them are getting what they want. And it's like our Heavenly Father's going, there's a reason I ask you to call me Heavenly Father, because you're still like children. And at the source, at the root of every single argument and quarrel you've ever had, at the source, the root, the source is not out there. It starts right here. You want something, and you're not getting it. And I'm telling you, the moment you begin to embrace this as a lifestyle, the temperature goes down, and anger will no longer be the boss of you. It won't control, as we're going to see, your moods or your mouth. Now, James goes on because he knows he's got to say this 2 or 3 more times because it's too easy to miss. He says, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. And we're like, okay, that's got to be hyperbole. Well, it is, but it isn't. His point is this, and this is what should cause all of us to stop and at least consider whether or not this is true. His point is this. He's saying, look, if you don't recognize that the source and the root is in here, not out there, you will carry the potential to do things, you'll carry the potential to take things to an unhealthy, destructive extreme. As long as you think it's him, don't miss this, as long as you think it's him, and since you can't control him, you will feel like you have an excuse not to control you. As long as I think it's her, and it's 100% her, then since I can't control her, I give up all reasoning when it comes to controlling me because she deserves it, he deserves it, they deserve it, whatever it is. And James says, look, I'm telling you, the very thing that leads to murder, it is inside of you. Because what causes murder? Somebody wants something they can't get any other way, or they want something they can't get, and it drives them to murder. Somehow it justifies a response, and they blame the other person. And James says, hey, heads up, all of you wise people, all of you people that are wise and have understanding. That's inside of you. That's inside of you. To think for a moment that you don't have it in you to do something unhealthy to another person in order to get what you want, don't deceive yourself. Be humble enough to recognize, oh my goodness, that resides in me. Then he wraps up like this. He says, come on, you're envious and you can't obtain. You want it and you can't get there. You want a break, you're not getting a break. Everybody got theirs, you haven't gotten yours yet. Everybody got in, you didn't get in yet. Everybody drives one, you don't drive one yet. Everybody else's kids, everybody else. He says, you want it and you can't get, so you fight and you quarrel. You can't get from him what you want. You can't get from her what you want. You can't get the approval, the acceptance. I mean, just fill in the blank. We've all got that stuff. But his point is, come on. The source is not out there. The source is in here. We aren't getting our way. We aren't getting what we want. We're like the kids in the back seat. And our Heavenly Father's going, hey, stop it. I don't want to hear that. Hey, no. We're not going to talk about the details until you can get on your side of the car, your side of the van, your side of the vehicle, and think for a minute. Wait a minute. What's causing this? It's not her. See, again, if I shake you up, what comes out is what's in there. And you can't say, well, if you'd stop shaking me, this wouldn't be in here. No. What comes out is what's in there. And what does conflict do? Conflict just shakes us up. And what comes out? Oh, my goodness. I just want my way. I want what I deserve. I want what was promised. And of course, just to make sure you don't hear me saying something I'm not, of course there are circumstances that should upset you. And of course being treated unfairly should upset you. And of course not having a promise kept should upset you. But in the middle of the conversation, as it dawns on you, mature, wise people of understanding pause and say, you know what? Part of the problem is, not the whole problem, but part of the problem, my part of the problem, the source of the problem is, I'm not getting what I want. And I'm telling you, when you can own your slice of the argument pie, when you can own your slice of the argument pie, the temperature comes down, and anger and rage and frustration will no longer be the boss of you.